In the autumn of 1936, a German railway worker named Wilhelm Koning was clearing a storage shelf in a back room of the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, where he had been assigned to assist with a reorganization of the antiquities collection, when he found a clay jar that had been sitting in a wooden crate since its excavation at a site called Kujut Rabu, outside the city 3 years earlier. The jar was approximately 5 inches tall. Its mouth had been sealed with asphalt. Inside the asphalt seal was an iron rod. Surrounding the iron rod, inside the jar, was a copper cylinder. The cylinder was corroded. The jar contained trace residue of an acidic liquid that had long since evaporated. Ning was not an archaeologist. He was a railway worker doing organizational labor. He had no theoretical framework for what he was handling, but he had enough practical experience with electrical components to recognize what he was looking at. He set the jar on a workbench. He found a second one in the same crate, then a third. There were 9 in total. He wrote a report that evening, not for the museum, but for himself, in a personal notebook, in which he described each jar in detail and noted that the combination of iron, copper, and residual acid in a sealed vessel was structurally identical to a voltaic cell, a battery. He was not the first person to handle these objects. They had been excavated by a team, transported, catalogued, and stored. No one before Ning had written the word battery in any document associated with them. Ning brought his notebook to the museum director the following morning. The director looked at the objects. He thanked Ning for his diligence and told him the items would be reviewed by a specialist. Ning was reassigned to a different task. He never worked in that storage room again. When he attempted to follow up 6 weeks later, he was told the jars had been reclassified and were no longer accessible to non-curatorial staff. Ning published his observations in 1938 in a small German antiquities journal. The article was 3 pages. It received 1 citation in the 40 years that followed its publication. The jars became known, eventually, as the Baghdad Batteries, named for the city, not for the man who recognized what they were. The official position of mainstream archaeology on the Baghdad Batteries is that their function remains uncertain. That is the language used in museum catalogs, in academic survey texts, and in the responses given to researchers who have asked directly what the objects were built to do. Function remains uncertain. The phrase is precise, and it is, in a narrow technical sense, accurate. No written document from the Parthian period, the era roughly 250 BCE to 224 C, in which the jars are dated, explicitly states that these vessels were used to generate electrical current. There is no ancient text that says, "This is a battery," but the claim that function remains uncertain is doing a great deal of work in concealing what the physical evidence actually shows. In 1940, an engineer at the General Electric Research Laboratories named Willard Gray reconstructed a battery using the exact materials and proportions documented by Ning: clay jar, copper cylinder, iron rod, grape juice as the acidic electrolyte. Consistent with agricultural products available in the Parthian period, the reconstructed battery produced 1 volts, not a trace charge, not a theoretical output, a measured, functional electrical potential of 1 volts, sufficient to drive electroplating at low current. Gray published his reconstruction results. The publication exists. The voltage is documented. And yet the official position remains: function uncertain. Because no ancient text says the word battery, the physical evidence of a device that produces electricity when assembled from its documented components is classified as ambiguous. That classification has held for 86 years. Before we go further, if buried investigations like this are something you want more of, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it you want it. To understand why the Baghdad batteries matter beyond the objects themselves, and why the question of what they were used for has been so consistently avoided, you have to understand the problem that their existence creates for the official timeline of electrical technology. The official timeline is one of the foundational narratives of modern civilization. Alessandro Volta invented the battery in 1799. Michael Faraday established the principles of electromagnetic induction in the 1830s. The practical application of electrical current to industrial and commercial purposes followed across the 19th century, building toward the electrification of cities and the Industrial Revolution's second phase. This is the story of electricity as progress, as the product of European scientific genius working forward from first principles in a logical and documented sequence, each discovery enabling the next. It is the story that every school textbook in the Western world tells, and it is the story on which the authority of the institutions that manage our understanding of the ancient world substantially rests. The Baghdad batteries predate Volta by more than 2,000 years, if they are batteries, and the reconstructed voltage output of 1 volts from materials available in Mesopotamia in 200 BC is not a matter of interpretation, it is a measurement. Then the official timeline of electrical technology is not wrong at the margins, in the way that timelines are always adjusted as new evidence emerges. It is wrong at the foundation, in a way that calls into question not just one discovery, but the entire framework of technological progress that has been used to explain the difference between the ancient world and the modern one. An institution whose authority rests on that framework has a structural reason to maintain uncertainty, regardless of what the physical evidence demonstrates. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is an observation about how institutions behave when the evidence threatens the framework from which their authority derives. There are other objects that create the same problem. They are in museums, or they were in museums before certain decisions were made about where to store them. A collection of silver artifacts excavated in 1936 from a site near Tel El Amarna in Egypt, small vessels, decorated pins, figurines, were analyzed in 1938 by a German chemist named Dr. Helmut Ritter, who found that several of them carried gold plating of a quality and uniformity that, by the metallurgical standards of the period in which they were made, should not have been achievable through any documented ancient technique. Ritter's analysis identified the plating as electrodeposited, meaning applied through the controlled movement of dissolved metal ions in an electrically conductive solution. The same process that Gray's reconstructed Baghdad battery was sufficient to power. Ritter submitted his analysis to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which held the objects. The museum acknowledged receipt. The analysis was not published by the museum, not incorporated into the object records, and not referenced in any subsequent official description of the Tel El Amarna collection. Ritter's original submission document was among his papers when he died in 1961. His estate donated the papers to a university archive in Heidelberg. The submission is still there. The Tel El Amarna silver objects are described in the Cairo Museum's current catalog as examples of fine New Kingdom craftsmanship. No mention of electroplating. No mention of Ritter. This is where Ning's 9 jars connect to a pattern that extends across 3 continents and 80 years of institutional silence. In 1978, a metallurgist named Dr. Arne Egebrecht at the Romer Pelisaeus Museum in Hildesheim, Germany, conducted a reconstruction experiment using a Baghdad battery replica and a gold solution of the type that would have been available in the ancient Near East. He used grape juice as his electrolyte, consistent with the agricultural products of Mesopotamia, and a current output matching Gray's documented 1 volts. He ran the battery for 18 hours. At the end of 18 hours, he had electroplated a small silver figurine with a measurable, uniform gold layer. The thickness of that gold layer matched, within the tolerances of his measurement instruments, the thickness of gold plating found on ancient objects in museum collections across Europe and the Middle East. He photographed the results. He measured them. He published them. He gave interviews to academic and popular audiences in the early 1980s and made the argument clearly, and without exaggeration, ancient electroplating was not theoretically possible. It was demonstrably practical, using materials that ancient craftsmen in Mesopotamia had available, and the physical evidence of its products was sitting in museum display cases all over the world, described as objects of uncertain manufacture. Then the conversation stopped, not gradually, not after a period of debate and refutation. Mainstream archaeology did not engage with Egebrecht's work and find it wanting. It simply declined to engage. The journals that would have published a formal rebuttal did not publish one. They published nothing about it at all. His results entered the academic record and were treated by the institutions responsible for interpreting ancient technology as though the question he had answered was not a question anyone had asked. London, 1900. The Antikythera mechanism is recovered from a shipwreck off the Greek coast. It is a bronze device of extraordinary mechanical complexity, differential gearing, epicyclic motion, a working model of the solar system accurate enough to predict eclipses, manufactured around 100 BCE. The object sits in a museum in Athens for 50 years before anyone publishes a serious technical analysis of what it actually does. It takes 70 years and the application of X-ray tomography for mainstream institutions to fully acknowledge what it is. The delay was not caused by insufficient technology. It was caused by insufficient willingness to accept what the technology showed. The objects in the storage room in Baghdad waited 66 years between their excavation and their first serious academic reconstruction. The pattern of delay is consistent across every object of this type. When something suggests that ancient technological capability exceeded the official timeline, the response is not refutation. The response is reclassification, storage, and institutional silence maintained until the object's implications become impossible to suppress any further. The Baghdad batteries have not yet reached that threshold. They are still in the uncertain function category, where they have been for 86 years. Baghdad, 1938. A physicist named Arthur Hartman visits the Arak Museum specifically to examine the jars following Ning's publication. He is permitted to view them for 1 hour. He is not permitted to handle them or take measurements. He is told by a museum official that the objects are being prepared for a comprehensive study to be published in the near future. That comprehensive study was never published. Hartman wrote a letter to the museum 3 years later asking for an update. He received a form response noting that wartime conditions had delayed the project. The war ended. The study was never published. Delhi, 1961. An Indian archaeologist named R.K. Prasad, working on a survey of pre-Mauryan metalwork at a regional museum in Patna, documents 18 small copper objects whose surface carries a uniform silver coating that he cannot account for by any known ancient technique for silver application. He is a careful researcher. He does not use the word electroplating in his initial report because he cannot confirm it without chemical analysis he does not have access to. He uses the phrase coating pattern consistent with controlled deposition. He notes in his survey report that the uniformity of the coating across all 18 objects, combined with the thinness of the silver layer, rules out the application techniques, hammering, heat transfer, mercury amalgamation, that are documented in ancient Indian metalworking. His report is filed with the Archaeological Survey of India. The 18 objects are reclassified as requiring further study. Prasad submits a follow-up request for the further study to be initiated, naming 2 institutions with the metallurgical capacity to perform the analysis. His request is acknowledged. No study is initiated by either institution. Prasad retires in 1979. He does not describe the experience in any published account. He describes it once, in a private letter written in 1977 to a colleague at the University of Calcutta, as the sensation of filing a match report in which no one will confirm that the match took place. The 18 objects are described in the Patna Museum's current inventory as objects of uncertain manufacture. The phrase uncertain manufacture has appeared in that inventory without revision for 43 years. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The Smithsonian Institution's Department of Anthropology received a formal research proposal in 1969 from a team of 3 American researchers requesting access to comparative ancient metallurgical samples for an electroplating study. The proposal named specific objects held in the Smithsonian's collection that they wished to examine. The department responded that the objects named were not available for the type of analysis proposed, as such analysis would require sampling that the institution could not authorize for objects of their significance. The researchers proposed non-invasive analysis, spectroscopy and surface microscopy, neither of which require any physical contact with the objects. The department responded that their revised proposal did not meet the current criteria for research access. The criteria were not specified in either response. The researchers submitted a second revision. The department did not respond. One of the 3 researchers, a chemist named Dr. Patricia Warren, later described the experience in a letter to a colleague as attempting to ask a question that the institution had already decided not to hear, and she noted that what struck her most was not the refusals themselves, but their consistency of tone. Not hostile, not bureaucratically overwhelmed, but calm, as though declining this particular line of inquiry was a routine matter, as though it had been declined many times before by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The Smithsonian has never adequately explained why the non-invasive analysis of ancient metalwork to determine plating technique, a methodology that imposes no risk of damage to the objects, falls outside the criteria for research access, particularly when those criteria have never been made publicly available. It is never explained why Dr. Arne Egebrecht's electroplating reconstruction, which used documented ancient materials and produced measurable results published in a credentialed academic context, received no formal response from any mainstream archaeological institution in the 40 years since its publication. It has never explained why Willard Gray's 1940 voltage measurement of a reconstructed Baghdad battery, 1 volts, documented and reproducible, has coexisted for 86 years with an official institutional position of functional uncertainty, without any mainstream institution publishing a methodological critique of Gray's reconstruction or a counter-measurement that produced a different result. Why would a museum reclassify objects as requiring further study and then not initiate further study, not once, not in one museum, but across multiple institutions in multiple countries, across multiple decades? Why would Dr. Ritter's electroplating analysis of the Tel El Amarna collection sit in an archive in Heidelberg for 60 years without any institution engaging with it? Not to confirm it, not to refute it, but simply as though it does not exist? Why would 9 clay jars sitting in a wooden crate in a Baghdad storage room require 86 years of institutional uncertainty about their function, when the function can be demonstrated in an afternoon with materials available at any hardware store? The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty what the Baghdad batteries were used for. We know that they produce electricity when assembled as found. We know that the electricity they produce is sufficient for electroplating. We know that electroplated objects from the ancient world exist in museum collections and are described as objects of uncertain manufacture. We know that every researcher who has drawn a line connecting these three facts has encountered the same institutional response, not refutation, not engagement, but silence and reclassification. That pattern is not a coincidence, it is a policy. Wilhelm Ning died in 1945. His 1938 article, 3 pages, 1 citation in 40 years, is the primary source for the discovery of the Baghdad batteries in every subsequent account of them. The 9 jars he found in that wooden crate are in the Iraq Museum today, or they were until the museum's collection suffered damage during the 2003 invasion and its aftermath. The fate of several objects from the pre-Islamic collection remains undocumented. Whether the 9 jars are among the objects whose fate is undocumented is a question the museum has not publicly addressed. What is certain is that they existed, that they were measured, that their voltage output was replicated, that their potential connection to ancient electroplating was demonstrated, and that the institutions responsible for ancient history decided, collectively and repeatedly, that none of that was worth a formal response. The official history of electrical technology tells us that electricity was discovered in Europe in the 18th century by men whose names are in every school textbook. What the clay jars, the gold-plated silver figures, the unanswered research proposals, and the 3-page article in a German antiquities journal tell us is that something was generating electrical current in Mesopotamia 2,000 years before Volta was born, and that the institutions we trust to tell us what the past was made of have spent nearly a century deciding, very deliberately, not to say so. Subscribe and share this with someone who wants to know what they are not being told. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when the last museum stops letting anyone ask, what is in the storage room? Next week, I am following a thread that connects the Tel El Amarna electroplated objects to a patent filed in London in 1901 by an inventor who claimed to have rediscovered an ancient electrical process, a patent that was challenged within weeks of filing by 3 separate parties who should have had no knowledge it existed. An inventor named Samuel Ord. The patent was withdrawn. The Challenger correspondence is still in the UK Patent Office archive. You will not want to miss it.